Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to this video. In this video we are going to do radio programming on a jet start to finish. So this is going to be a very in-depth view on how to do this. A couple of the specific details. We will be doing it on a JR 28X. This is going to be very similar on Spectrum radios as well too, but the entire concept is very similar to programming any jet, I guess. It gives you a fundamental basis where to start from. I'll show you guys a few specifics about this jet, some of the tools I use, and we'll get into the programming side of things. And just a quick reminder, guys, if this is your first time finding my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. Give the video a thumbs up. When you hit that subscribe button, don't forget to hit the bell so you get notified when I release new videos. Let's dive in. Alright guys, so some of the tools that I use here to program the jet. Obviously we've got a radio, that's important. Sometimes I use my digital angle finder, so you can set this on one of the surfaces and adjust it and it'll tell you the angle. So I use that sometimes, not all the time though. I like just a old-fashioned set of calipers, just you know, not the digital kind. I've got the digital kind, but I like these ones better. Binding plug, we got to bind to the receiver. We've got some instructions for this receiver that we're using in the plane from JR. And then we've got the layout as well too. So here's some basic settings that I've always set up my ultra flashes with, and they work well. Then I've got my channel mapping there as well too. I still have to fill some of these in. So we need that. Cell phone comes in handy. And let's go over exactly what we're going to be doing in the radio here. So we've got the JR RG1131BPU, which is an 11-channel receiver, and it comes with 3 satellites. So we've got our telemetry satellite there, and then 2 other satellites in the plane. Now we do have a gyro in this plane. This is one of the new Powerbox Igyro 3Extras. So I will be showing you guys how to set that up as well too. We've got the ELECTRON gear controller. This is the RS200 model. So we are running the nose steering through this. And I'll explain more about that, but we've got a wide, just because of the number of channels we have here, we've actually got the rudder wide. So it is that clear plug you can see right there. I made that up with two leads coming off of it. One goes to the gear controller, one goes to the rudder input on the gyro. So that's kind of the fundamentals of what is in this plane. And that's really what this video is about. It's about the fundamentals of programming. So let's go to the next step. All right, guys, so here is the new model that's been set up. So this model is brand new, clean. There's nothing that has been, it's tied to the existing Ultra Flash plane. So, okay, so what we need to do first is we need to lay out the wings and that type of stuff, what type of surfaces we're using. So we are going to go into wing type, and this is where we're going to program all of our surfaces, right? So for a wing, we've got 2 ailerons, 2 flaps right there. Okay, for a tail, we've got 2 elevators and 1 rudder. And throttle, we're not going to use that. So now on this radio, it automatically assigns the channels to those surfaces. Okay, so that's one of the first things we're going to do. While I'm here, I'm going to go into the trim system and change my throttle trim. Okay, so when I do this, when I do the throttle trim on my jets, I don't want to sit there and go do and wait for it to go a whole bunch of clicks to the middle point. I want to set this to 100. Okay, and you can see in this corner right here, so when the turbine's off, it's at -200. When I'm ready to fly, I go 1, 2, 3, 4. You could do it as a 2-position switch. I'm okay with 4, and we're at +200. And that's when the turbine is ready to run. Okay, so that's just something I do because we're already here. So that stuff's been set up. Now what I need to do is I'm going to finish doing my channel mapping because our channels are mostly programmed for us. Okay, so if we look here at the list, I've got my throttle, aileron right, elevator right. Rudder is number 5 or 4. Number 5 is gear. Okay, number 6 is left aileron, so we'll write that in. Okay, number 7 is flap right, so write that in. Okay guys, so we've got number 7 is right flap, number 8 is left elevator, number 9 hasn't been done yet, but I've got that. I've already looked where the actual receiver lead goes to, that's gyro gain. Number 10 is smoke pump, and number 11 is left flap. So the only thing that makes this a little bit different from like a new build on a jet is that I've already got everything plugged in, right? So if I was doing this on a new build on a jet, I would do this step exactly how I've showed you guys, and I would kind of pre-lay things out, and then I'd have everything assigned to a channel, and then as I was building the jet, I would start plugging things in, or aircraft in general. I would start plugging things in and adjusting the servos from that point. Okay, so now that we've got all the channels assigned, we need to assign switches, right? So we've got aux 10, which is smoke, is assigned to the right switch, which is kind of nice. Flap switch.
Flight mode 01.
And flap switch isn't assigned properly, it's to this one. This is what I use for my flap switch. Gear switch is down here. Gear switch isn't assigned properly. We need brake as well too. And the brake setup is going to have to be a mix. I think on that controller, you do an overdrive on the brake. So that's something we need to set up as well too in the actual controller for the brake system. And our gyro gain is right here, which has to be switched to number 9. So we need to adjust all these channels. Okay, so on the JR radio, we go into channel settings, and this is where we get into it. So we'll just start and work our way down the list. So gear right now is switch K, which is this switch right here. We don't want it on switch K. We want it on switch C. Okay, so now the gear is on switch C. Left aileron, I don't use rates, so we're going to inhibit anything to do with the aileron. Flap needs to be on the F switch, so we're going to change that to F switch. Elevator, we're going to inhibit that because again, no dual rates. Aux 9, when I look at my list, is gyro gain. Okay, so initially for gyro gain, I'm going to put it on H, just because we need to fly the plane and adjust it, but I will eventually switch it to J, because this is where my normal gyro channel is. Okay, so I'm going to there. And that is H. So aux 10 is smoke. That is my L switch, so that's set up properly. And then left flap, we need to put on the flap switch, which is there. Okay, so all my channels have been assigned. All the other channels don't do anything, but just because we want to, we'll inhibit all those, so you don't have any funny mixes happening. And that's all the standard 16 channels done. Okay, so we are all good there. Channels have been assigned. All right, guys, so the next thing we need to do is we need to bind the receiver to the radio. So we'll go into the bind system. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, so I need to put the bind plug in the receiver. That's pretty standard and pretty simple. All right, so bind plug has been inserted. Now we will power on the plane, and we are flashing, and waiting to bind. Okay, so we'll bind. That's done. Now we're going to turn off the plane and take out the bind plug. Okay, so before I turn this plane on, now this plane does have Xbus servos. but we have a non-Xbus receiver, and even if we had an Xbus receiver, because our channels are going through the gyro, you can't use them as Xbus channels, okay? So that's just a little tidbit for you if you're using an Xbus system. But we'll turn this guy on. Okay, and there we go. So the gyro is not going to do anything because we haven't set the gyro up yet. But right now, all of our surfaces are working. Okay, so all of our trims are centered except for the throttle, but we're not worried about that. So we're going to leave those where they are, obviously, and let's just take a quick walk around the plane and see what we have to adjust. So we need to add a little bit of right aileron trim, sub-trim. We're a little bit off there. Elevator, just slightly off. Just slightly off. We also need to check our directions here too. Okay, so all of our surfaces are just a hair off. So we'll do right aileron, that works. Left aileron, that works. Up elevator, that one's backwards. Up elevator, that one's backwards. And right rudder, that's backwards. Okay, so now we need to know, or we know that we need to change our rudder and elevator servo reversals. Okay, so on our radio, we're gonna go into our reverse switch. And, okay, so we needed elevator, reversed, rudder, reversed, and elevator, reversed. Okay, so those are all done now. And we've got back up elevator working correctly. We've got right aileron working, or sorry, right rudder working correctly. Okay guys, so there's a couple ways of thinking about all of this on a plane, and I know there's going to be a lot of opinions on this, but I've got kind of a mix on this plane of aluminum servo arms and the plastic heavy-duty JR ones. So on the elevator, we're using the JR aluminum servo horns. So this side here is set up very, very perpendicular to the actual servo, so we're at about 90 degrees there, and that's why we are extremely close. So on this one, I'm just going to use sub-trim to get that little bit of click out. Okay, on this side, we've got more distance here on our surface, but we also need to remember that that servo horn is not sitting at 90 degrees. So when this servo horn gets pulled towards the front of the plane, it's going to pull this surface down. So we'll also use sub-trim for that. Okay, we'll check the rudder here. We need to add a little bit of sub-trim there. And we'll look at the ailerons, and we're really, really close on the ailerons. So again, we'll just use sub-trim everywhere to level these out. And the other option here is doing a mechanical adjustment, which I also like as well too. But with like 2 clicks of sub-trim, I'm okay with that. Okay, so I'm not going to specifically show you the radio side of this because it's very, very simple on basically any radio. We're just going to go into the sub-trim setting, and we're just going to go through all of our surfaces and adjust the sub-trim as we need to. So starting with right aileron, we're just adding points as we need to. So I'll do all this, and then I'll come back and show you guys. All right, guys, so the only one with a bunch of sub-trim is going to be the left elevator, and that's the one that it's got an aluminum arm, and in order to get that aluminum arm centered on the servo, perpendicular on the servo, so, you know, servo bodies here, arms directly at 90-degree angle, is to add a bunch of sub-trim. So that's what we needed to do, not a big deal. So the sub-trim is all set up. And nice thing about these servos is they are extremely accurate. These are the Deeforce Aviation JR servos, the ones that replace the 8411s. So all of our surfaces now are perfectly in line. So that's all done. So next thing we have to do is we have to set up the flap system. And the reason I'm going to do that next is because that's one of the surfaces, right? So now every plane is going to be a little bit different, but basically we've got a middle, you just think about this as servo travel, right? So a middle servo travel is basically half flaps or takeoff flaps. One servo end will be regular flying, middle will be half flaps, and landing will be the other end of the spectrum, right? So right now our servo's in the middle on left flaps, or our channels are in the middle on right flaps and left flaps. Okay, so what we need to do is get those surfaces lined up. So I'm going to try and show you guys here in the camera. So you can see that that flap is at a much steeper angle than that flap. Okay. Now I do have written in my book here that subtrim right flap plus 13, left flap minus 90. So I think that I needed to add a bunch of subtrim to the left flap. So I'm just going to follow this and see what happens with the flap system, and we'll see where that gets us to. Okay, so subtrim on the right flap. I'm just going to leave that one blank for now. And then we've got left flap at minus 90. Okay, I'm going to go take a look. Okay guys, so I just had the direction written down wrong. So this was actually plus 90 on the flap and then plus 13 on the right flap. So plus 90 on left flap, plus 13 on right flap. Okay, so now that that's done, we should have a similar center. So I'll show you guys the way that I do this. You can do this obviously multiple ways. You can use your angle finder, you can use your set of calipers and try and measure the distance. There's nothing wrong with your eyes, using your eyes for this kind of thing. So it's going to be hard to show you on the camera, but what I do, I'll try and use the same kind of shot as my eyes on this. So what I do is stand over the plane, and as you bring your head down, you'll start to see the surface disappear. Okay, so if we're using my fingers as an example of the flap, you can see the entire flap. As you move your head down, you can see that flap disappearing. And all I do is even out the left and the right side. So I can just see the left trailing edge of the flap. I can just see the right trailing edge of the flap. So that tells me with my eyes that those two surfaces are centered. Now just for giggles, I'll use the calipers. Okay, so center to center, we are at 42 millimeters. And left side, center to center, we are at 42 millimeters. So those surfaces are very closely matched. Now we only, according to my setup diagram here, we only want 27 millimeters of takeoff flap and 90-ish millimeters of landing flap, but we'll adjust that in the flap menu, not in the subtrim, obviously, because the subtrim is centering the middle flap setting. So when I go to full flap now, my flaps are not even. Okay, so again, hard to show you here, but I'm just seeing the trailing edge of this flap, and I can still see a substantial amount of that flap. Okay, so we're going to have to go to the travel adjustment settings, and we'll adjust that out. But I'm going to go to flaps off right now and see what that looks like.
Flight mode 03.
And this switch is actually reversed right now. So when I go all the way forward, that should be flaps off.
Flight mode 02.
So I'm going to switch that around. So flaps, yes.
Flight mode 02.
And then other flap, yes. Now because of that, we might have to adjust our sub trims out. So again, we're on middle flaps, and we are wonky there. So I think my original -90 was correct. And this is all part of setting up the an airplane, trial and error, knowing what you're doing, trying to figure things out. That's why I'm not leaving any of these steps out, because you got to figure this stuff out if you want your airplane to work. So we'll go to -90. Could have just pushed that once, but that's okay. Okay, so now we're at -90. I'm going to use that same trick to check and see how we're looking down the flaps. Okay, so we're looking okay, but we're not balanced. So I'm going to balance this out using that trick, and I'll show you guys what the end result was. So right now we're at right flaps 13, left flaps -90, and that's not where we want to be. All right, guys, so now I have evened out those flaps. This is where we ended up. So we're at -90 on the left flap, which is where we were before. Right flap, we're actually at -20. And I checked those with my eyes, and I also checked them with my calipers, and that gives us 45 millimeters of down right now at the mid flap setting. So we will adjust that. Okay, so we'll go to flaps off. Okay, so I went to flaps off, and then I went to full flaps, and our full flaps are actually really close now. So this is definitely closer to where we want. So what I'll do now is I will go into the actual flap system, and I just want to check flaps off and check and make sure we're not pulling a bunch of current there. Okay, so what we want to do is we are going to go to flaps off. Oh, and I forgot about this. So the nice thing about the flap menu in JR is it's not going to do anything until we add percentages. So as long as our centers are even and our servo travel's even, we can add servo travel to this. So I'll show you what I mean here in a second. So right now we're on flaps off. Okay, my switch is all the way forward. That's another little tidbit for you guys. The way I fly my plane is if my plane's sitting on the tarmac and I want to fire up my radio ready to fly the plane, all my switches are forward. That way I'm not figuring stuff out and worrying about it. All my switches are forward. So gear is down, gyro doesn't really matter, but gyro can be off or forward. Smokes down, flaps up, all that stuff. Okay, so that's how I set my radio up. My little tidbit for you guys in this video. Okay, so we're going to add flaps. Got to figure out which way we got to go. There we go. Okay, so we are adding our flaps off. Okay, so we are very close on this side. Right at 90. Let's check the other side. Now we're a little bit off on this side. Okay, and that's what I wanted to check and see. Okay, because when our flap menu was not activated, and I went to my forward or flaps off switch, I could hear the servos working. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to adjust the limit on the actual servo. So if I go to this side, we are actually, there's a little bit of pressure there. Okay, so actually this one has too much pressure, so I'm going to knock the travel down a little bit to 86. Okay, we've got a little bit of looseness here, which is good. Some looseness in your flap is fine, because when there's wind traveling over it, it's gonna push it up essentially, or it's gonna hold it in place. Now you don't want this to be flopping around, so maybe I'll add one or two more points to see. So we'll put it to 88. think 87 is the right number. Okay guys, so at 88 points on the left flap, it is nice and solid and even without any play. So what we need to do now is we need to go back into travel adjust, and on the right flap here we need to add more travel to even out the flap. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to match it, right? So the left flap is nice and level here. The right flap was low, and we're just trying to bring it up. Maybe one more point. Nice thing about this radio, I don't know how many other radios do this, but we can also go in sub points as well too. Okay, so happy with that. Hopefully our flap set up on the 0 point.
Flight mode 02.
The flaps up point.
Flight mode 01.
Okay, so now I'm just going to go back and double check the midpoint on the flaps.
Flight mode 02.
Okay, and that still looks good. And then we'll go to full flaps.
Flight mode 03.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this one as well too. So same thing we did with flaps off, and if we have to do any adjustments here, we're going to adjust it in the sub trim menu, or sorry, the travel adjust menu, not the flap menu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add travel here. Sorry, other direction. Quickly use my calipers to make sure we're in the right wheelhouse. So going to set it to 90 millimeters of travel. Just use that to quickly check. Okay, so on the right flap, I just use the calipers. That gets us in the right wheelhouse. So now with this in the right wheelhouse of travel, I'm going to actually do my visual test and check the measurement on the flaps. Okay guys, so I've used the visual, I've checked it with calipers, and we are extremely close. Okay, so happy with that. We're at about 85 millimeters of travel, which is good. So now what I want to do is I want to slow this stuff down. So in my JR menu, it's delay settings. So flap, we're going to add 2 seconds of delay. Elevator, we're going to add 2 seconds of delay. Flaperon, which we will be using for crow, is going to be 2 seconds of delay. Okay, so now when we go back to the flaps,
Flight mode 02.
everything moves
Flight mode 01.
nice and slow. So now when we switch this stuff, this is what it looks like. So that's flaps off.
Flight mode 02.
That's takeoff flaps, which is still too much travel.
Flight mode 03.
And that's landing flaps. So I'll show you guys from this side. Okay, we can still get some more travel out of those flaps, but we'll get a little bit more out of them if we can. And again, just doing the visual to check and make sure that we're even and they look good. And that's what they look like. Okay, so that is our flap system set up.
Flight mode 01.
Okay, now what we need to do is we need to add some elevator compensation on for this plane. So if you look at our list here, so for takeoff flap, we're at 27 millimeters. Oh yeah, we need to adjust that. We have about 1 millimeter of down elevator. So down elevator being forward stick, okay, down elevator. And landing flap, we have about 5 millimeters of down elevator. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to adjust this to roughly 27 millimeters for takeoff flap. Okay, so we'll go middle position,
02.
and then we just adjust the percentage. Okay, so I'm just going to roughly check that with my calipers here. So we'll go just about 30. So we're a little shy, so we'll go up a couple more. Okay, and I'll show you guys the visual here of what that looks like now. So forward stick flaps off, takeoff flaps, 30 degrees or 30 millimeters of travel, landing flaps, about 90 millimeters of travel. Okay, so that's done. Now what we want to do is we want to add our 1 millimeter of down elevator and 5 millimeters of down elevator. So middle flaps, elevator. Okay, so 1 millimeter is not a whole heck of a lot, but that's what we're doing for 1 millimeter. I'll bring you guys over here and show you. That's about 1 millimeter. Just a little bit of down. Here's off. And down elevator. So for first flights, that's going to be fine. Full flaps, we want 5 millimeters, which is that much, that much. Okay, so we're going to come to our radio. Put 20 points in there. And that's close. We're going to add a little bit more. We'll go to 30. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so that's better. And when I fly on full flaps and I'm landing, I actually like to be pulling back a little bit on the stick. I don't mind that at all. I don't like a neutral stick. I like the nose to be sinking, and I like to be flying in my elevator. That's just the way I fly when I land. And so we'll keep it there. Obviously, when we maiden this thing, we're going to adjust it. Okay, so that's full flaps. The other thing we're going to do right now, because we're in the menu, is we're going to add crow. So I do fly with crow on my my ultra flashes. So when I'm at full flaps, the ailerons on both sides come up a little bit. So that is called flaperon on my JR radio. Crow, we want to be adding about 5 millimeters of travel. So that's about 4. So we'll add 5 points. And that's 5 millimeters of travel. So that is crow. And that's what it looks like, guys. So flaps all off, crow's off, no elevator compensation, take off flaps, nothing happens to the aileron, elevator 1 millimeter of adjustment, full flaps, elevator comes down. So we have down elevator, right? 90-ish millimeters of travel on the flaps and a little bit of crow. So now my flap system is completely set up. The only thing left to do is some final adjustments, but that part is done. All right, guys, so next thing we're going to do is adjust the travel. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I set up my planes, specifically with the gyros as well too. So, all right, my smoke pump was blinking like crazy, so we've got to reverse the smoke pump, which is number 10 aux 5. Okay, one little thing to do in between everything. Saw the blue light flashing for the smoke pump, so that's why we had to switch it. Okay, so we are going to go into dual rates. Okay, so I do not use dual rates for different travel settings, but I do use dual rates for my gyro. What happens with the Powerbox gyros is when your switch is off and you're not flying with any gyros, whatever you have that set to, let's say you have 30% expo, okay, and it feels good to you. When you turn the gyro on, it actually, and I'm just going to explain this in the simplest format, it actually adds more expo, or it feels like it adds more expo. So I do set up dual rates purely for different expo settings. So if I do my ailerons at 30% expo on gyro off. Then I'll set up my when my gyro's on to be about 10 points lower, so about 20% expo instead of 30. So that's something I will do. So what I'm going to do first is go into my flight modes. Okay, flight mode setting. And this switch right now is the flap switch. And I want it to be my gyro switch. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now my flight modes are on this switch. So I got to turn them on too. So 0. That's position 1.
Flight mode 02.
And usually I call this gyro red, gyro off, gyro green, or whatever, right? So I'll switch that as well too.
Flight mode 01. Flight mode 03.
Okay, so we've got flight mode 3, flight mode 2, flight mode 1.
Flight mode 01.
So we'll change this now to be gyro green, off, and gyro red. Okay, so those are set up now.
Flight mode 02. Flight mode 03.
Now if we go out, go back in.
Gyro off. Gyro green. Gyro off. Gyro red.
There we go. Okay, so that's done. Now if we go back into dual rates. Okay, so for all my dual rates, the travel is going to be the same, but the expo is going to change, right? So we want to be adjusting position 1 first. And right now, full aileron travel is too much. I'm probably at 20 something millimeters of travel. Okay, so we want, I'm going to go about 12 millimeters of travel. Okay, so we've got 12 millimeters on the calipers. Okay, so too much. So what I'm going to do is dial the dual rates down. Okay, so we're at 100%. We're going to go down to 60%. I'll just do a quick test. I think that still looks like it's too much, but let's measure it. Oh, it's actually really close. Yeah, very close. Okay, so we are at 12 millimeters up and down, right? I'm just going to put you guys down and check that with 2 hands here. Okay, so right aileron's all good. Now we're going to go to the left aileron, repeat the exact same thing, while all we're really doing is checking to make sure we've got the same travel as the right aileron. Okay, so our travel itself is good at 60%. So what we want to do is we want to adjust all of my positions to 60%. Okay, so those are all done. And now we want to add some expo to the middle position. So we're just going to put in, we'll just start with 30% expo, and we will put the other 2 gyro on positions. Oops, positive expo, not negative expo for JR.
Gyro red.
Okay, so gyro off, we've got 60% travel, 30% expo, gyro red,
Gyro red.
20%, gyro green, 20%. So our ailerons are all set up, and now let's move on to the elevators. Okay, so elevator travel, we are looking for about the same, about 12 millimeters. We'll just go with 12. I think that's probably good. I've got written down here 14. Let's go with 13 millimeters of elevator travel. Okay, we'll do the exact same procedure for the elevators with the radio, and I'll come back and show you guys what we ended up with. Okay guys, so when I came back to the elevators, what I did was I checked the right elevator, okay, at about 80% travel on the dual rate menu, and that was fine. And then I went over to the left elevator, and the travel was different in both directions. Okay, so what we have to do there is we go to the travel adjust menu, and we fine tune it. So forward elevator, I needed to back it down 8 points. It was traveling too far. And so we put that to 92. Back elevator, we needed to bump it up to 110. So now these elevators are perfectly matched. And you'll find too, if your surfaces aren't matched like that, what happens is you can go to like the halfway point on the travel like that and do that same visual check that I showed you on the flaps. So if I'm looking at both these elevators, right now they are paired very similar, right? And you can do checks when you're flying as well too. If you're flying along, pull back on elevator very, very carefully on the stick so you're not adding any aileron trim, and your plane pulls up but pulls to one side a little bit, then you've got an imbalance in your surfaces, right? And so that's just something to, in the elevators, so that's just something to pay attention to. So now the elevators are balanced. We've got a good amount of travel, probably too much travel, but we'll stick with 13 millimeters, and we can dial it down when we maiden it. So we're gonna go back into the dual rate menu again. Okay, and our elevators were at 80%. Maybe I'll dial that back now to 70. See what kind of travel we get from that. Okay, so we're not getting quite 12 millimeters. So we will bump it up to 75, and we'll start with that. Okay, so now on every gyro setting, we want to make sure we have the same travel. Oops. 75. Okay, so travel's the same on all settings. Now we want to adjust our expo. On the off setting, we'll do the same thing. We'll put 30% expo. And then the gyro on settings, we'll put 20%. There we go. Okay, so that part's done. Now we just have the rudder to do. And again, I'll do the exact same procedure on the rudder. We're looking for about 42 to 45 millimeters of travel, essentially as much as we can get. So let's just put it to, we'll just go to 42 to begin with. Okay, so I'll do this part again, and I will come back and check in. All right, guys, so rudder, we're actually getting the perfect amount of travel at 100%. So that is, it's about 44 millimeters of travel is what we're getting. So all of my channels have the same amount of travel, or all the positions, sorry. And then we're gyro red is 20%, green's 30, or off's 30, green is 20%. Okay, so all of our rates, surfaces, and everything have been set up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the flap settings. So with full flaps, do we have any binding? So what I mean by that is, you know, if you look at these ailerons that have crow, and I go full right aileron, is there any binding there in the surfaces? Same thing on the other side. I'm getting movement the whole way, so we're good. Elevator, right? We've got a bunch of down elevator put in. And no binding. Okay, so that works good with flaps. Happy with that. All right, guys, now because the gear controller was set up previously, it actually all works 100%. So I'm not going to go into detail about setting up the ELECTRON gear controller, but basically when the gear is down, we've got nice travel on the nose wheel. Okay, if we're holding right steering and we do gear up, you'll see the nose wheel center. Okay, now the other thing we need to figure out is brakes. So I'm just trying to go from memory here. I think what happened was we needed to set up a mix. So on the gear channel, if the gear, yeah, that's what it was. So the gear only required to move so far to go down, and then the right slider was an override for it. So I'm going to go through that and let's try and figure that out because we need to get that sorted. So basically what we need to do is we need to adjust this gear channel. All right, guys, so what I needed to do was actually keep the travel in the channel, but have the slider adjust the travel. So I am not an expert with mixes, but it takes me a little bit of time to figure it out, and I did. So I'll show you guys what I ended up with here. So we've got a standard mix, so P, which is the slider on the side, to channel 5, which is gear channel. The offset 0, and basically what we did here is just adjust the travel. So with the brakes off, we had to add a plus 100. With brakes on, 0. So that's how we adjusted it. Really not a lot of rhyme or reason for that. The only thing I want to make sure of is that this works when the gear is up. Or sorry, the brakes don't work when the gear is up. So we're in position 1 right now. So now we're in a different position. And I'm just going to go back to the monitor menu. The monitor menu definitely is your friend. So it does still work, but it doesn't work enough that it is going to drop the gear, because the gear has to be at the midway point before it drops. So we're good there. The brakes are set up. The gear is set up. Now if we have to adjust the power on the brakes, all I have to do is adjust the travel on the gear channel. So what I mean by that is if I go to travel adjust, the gear travels at 70% on the brake side of things, right? So if we go up in that number, it's going to increase the brake power. If we go down in that number, it's going to decrease it. And then our slider here is proportional as well. Okay, so that part's set up. Okay guys, so the next thing I think we're going to do is we're going to get the turbine set up and programmed. Okay, so we've got our Kingtech data terminal here, so we're going to plug that in. All right, so we are running the Kingtech telemetry in this unit. So the ECU is actually buried down there underneath the board, and the plug-in for the data terminal is on the telemetry unit. So that's where we plug it in. We will go into the menu here. Hopefully you guys can see this, and it shows up. So most of the turbines are going to be very similar. JetCats are different. But Kingtech's, any turbine using Zukoi, which is XICOY, is going to be the same. So we go into radio. We don't want telemetry configuration. RC learn. Okay, so 2 is enter. So we enter. So stick up, trim up is number 1. So we come to our radio and we do trim up, stick up. Okay, so when that's done, then we go, number 2 is save. So save. Okay, stick down, trim down. Stick down, trim down. So remember, we're going all the way to minus 200. Number 2 is save. Okay, stick down, trim up for idle. So stick staying down, trim is going up. So you always have to be in this spot when you want to run the turbine. Okay, so that's done. Save. So this is the actual signal it's getting from the transmitter. Okay, and that's the percentage. So right now it's stick down, trim down. Okay, so we're at 43% for idle, which is fine. Okay, so we're good there. That's fine and dandy. Okay, so turbine is effectively all set up. The radio is learned to the ECU, so we can unplug that. Now I told you guys I was going to show you everything, so what I'll do next is I'm going to add the telemetry information onto, oh, it's already on there, isn't that awesome, onto this screen. So basically we've got our telemetry for the turbine here, right? So throttle's at -200. So essentially what this is, it's not, the JR telemetry is not great. It's pretty lackluster, but it does show us our basic information, so we don't essentially need to plug that in. So throttle -200, right? We've got our RPM, so if I actually take this and go up, you'll see the RPM climb. And we've got that type of gauge there. We've got our temperature gauge, temperature. So there's our feedback from the turbine on the radio. So that part's done. Now we'll set up our timer since we're here. Okay, you can see the different screens there. Okay, so timer, we need to go into the actual timer section. Okay, we're going to activate countdown. So we want for our first flight, we're going to go 6 minutes. Okay, it's going to shake, rattle, and roll. Switch select, we want to select the gear switch. So this is how I set my planes up. When we flick the gear up, we want our timer to start. So what that looks like is you taxi out, the timer hasn't started, you take off, you flick your gear switch, and the timer starts. That's how I set my aircraft up. Okay, now if we go to the home screen, timer. Okay, so we're taking off, we flick our gear up, and timer starts. Oh, and I don't want it to stop. So we're going to go back into timer. And we want to make it a trigger timer. So now it's just going to trigger it and it won't turn off. Okay, if we want to reset it, you just push the timer itself and timer reset. Okay, so now we flick gear up and timer's going. And doesn't stop when we put the gear switch down. Okay, we'll reset that. Okay, so timer's set up. All right, guys, so now we're going to set up the gyro. One thing you want to make sure of is you have lots of travel on the gain adjustment. So I actually need to bump this up to 150 in each direction. If you don't do that, you don't have the option of getting all the gain out of the gyro. So just keep that in mind. So that's done. Now what we need to do is, step number 1 is programming the position of the gyro. So we hold this button in, we turn the plane on. As soon as the LEDs start to cycle, we let the button go. Okay, so I'm pushing the LEDs in, or pushing the button in, pull that, let go of the button, and then what happens is gyro starts doing that. So 1 green light and 2 of the red flashing lights are on. Okay, so what we want to do now is we're setting the direction or position of the gyro. So we're going to lift the tail, elevators reset, tail to the right, and that's it. So if you check the direction of the surfaces right now, so if we take our gyro channel and we add all the negative gain, so red. Okay, if we check these surfaces, they're actually moving the wrong direction. Okay, so if I lift this wing up, this aileron surface should move up to correct. It's moving down, which is fine. But we can check that the ailerons work when the ailerons are supposed to work. The elevator works when the elevator is supposed to work, as does the rudder. So all the surfaces are working properly. but the key to making them work the right direction is programming the direction on the travel limits of the gyro. So what you do is we're going to hold the button down. Starts to flash. We start off with ailerons. Okay, and I've shown this in my other video as well too, my gyro setup video, but we'll go through this. Okay, so what we do is right aileron first, push the button. Lights on the gyro change to red. Okay. It's an easy series to remember, so it's right, then left. Push the button. Now we're in elevator. Elevator back. Push the button. Elevator forward. Push the button. Rudder right. Push the button. Rudder left. Push the button. Okay, so now with our gain all the way maxed out on the red setting, if we lift this wing, this surface should move up, which it does. If we lift the tail, the elevator should move up, which it does. Okay, if we take the rudder and move it to the right, the rudder should move to the right, which it does. Aileron, wing up, aileron up. Okay, so all those surfaces are moving correctly. Now, one of the things that the 3Extra doesn't do that the old 3E did is on the negative side, it defaults to the ailerons being in heading hold, attitude hold, whatever you want to call it, not the elevators. So in order to do that, I'm going to plug in my blue comm adapter. Okay, this little guy here, which pairs up with my phone. We go into the mobile terminal. It does its thing. And then we can go on the bottom here to Igyro, JR 3Extra. And now we're into the gyro settings. We don't have the GPS plugged in yet. That's just so we can get the most movement out of our gains. If you plug the GPS in and you're in a building, it won't connect to the GPS signals. Okay, but we want to turn these airspeed factors all the way up because this is a fast plane. We're going to go to aileron. That's all fine. You can see attitude assist here is checked off on the negative side. Now if we go to elevator, we want to check those attitude assists off, or on, sorry. So now if we go to the gyro, gain all the way down, we've got red lights except rudder. So that's what we're looking for there. And that's it. Okay, so gyro essentially for this step is set up. We're just going to back out of the mobile terminal. Okay, and so for the initial flights, the gyro is done. We're not going to use the gyro on the initial flights. We're just going to keep the gain at the midpoint. Okay, so gyro is off, and that's where we're going to keep it. We'll unplug the blue comm adapter. And we can plug in the GPS now. Okay, so that's that. That's how we set up the 3Extra gyro in the plane. All right, guys, and that is basically it. I'm just going to go through the channels here. So we got throttle, that's set up, that's set up. Aux 9 is our gyro setting. So what I'm going to do with that, so because the first flight that I actually set the gyro up, I only want positive gain and I want to be able to turn it off nice and quickly on the dial. I'm going to actually change the dial setting. So on this radio, we go into hardware settings. We go into the dial. So input type, we want to be 0 to 100%. Okay, now if we go back to, there we go. So the reason I'm doing that is so if I turn the gyro on and something's going on, I just want to be able to turn it off nice and quickly. And if I'm trying to find the center, if it's going positive and negative, that's going to be a challenge to find the center. So what I've done on other planes is just put like 25% travel on the switch, but I want to actually be able to fine tune this. So that's what we've done there. Last thing we need to do is set up the smoke pump. So when I turn this on, I only want the travel to be just past the halfway mark. So we're just going to go into our travel adjust. Smoke is number 10. And on the other side, I'm going to turn the plane off just because I don't want to be burning out the smoke pump. And we're just going to turn this down to 10%. So we'll adjust this on the first couple flights or whatever, but that just gets the smoke pump initially kind of set up. So I don't do anything fancy with mixes on throttles and things like that. I just, when I'm flying, I like to flick the smoke pump on and off. And that's, for me, that's the easiest place. Some of these radio settings for me, guys, are just because of my hand, right? So just to give you some insight on how I set up my radio, you know, what am I doing? I'm taking off, right? Flaps are on takeoff setting. And when I'm taking off, I'm taking off. Now I'm up, throttle's still at full. I can take my hand off comfortably and gear goes up, okay? I'm making my first bank and I'm throttling down about halfway. When my gear comes up, my flaps go up. Okay, so that's why I always do flaps off forward. You know, if you're coming in for a landing and you need flaps off, it's easy just to go boom, forward, throttle up, and you're good, right? So flying around, gyro, red and green is good for me there. And there. It works for me. And then my brake setting is over on this side, right? Coming in for a landing, and you know, we're at half flaps, we're at full flaps, and I'm landing, sorry, gears down, coming in for a landing, and I'm using my brakes on this side while I'm steering on this side, not really focusing on the elevator or aileron controls. So that's why I have it set up that way. And then again, everything forward when I'm turning my plane on and it's getting ready to go. All right, guys, so that is the setup procedure on my CARF Ultra Flash with a JR 28X radio. Now, a couple little more tips for you guys. You know, what am I going to do next to this plane? I'm going to take it out and I'm going to do some taxi runs with it. I'm going to range check it, right? That's two things to do. And then I'm just going to do some final setups on like the smoke pump just to check the, I don't need to worry about that initially, but basically it's just taxi runs and making sure I'm comfortable with everything. So that's kind of step number one before I fly it. And then what I'd suggest you guys do when you set up any new plane is, especially in the first like 10 to 20 flights, you should be modifying something in the radio every single time you bring that plane in. So don't fight to fly the plane with it not performing properly, right? If something's out of trim it properly. Don't sit there and fight it with your stick the entire flight. You know, I'll do that initially for the first 10 to 20 flights, and then once it's really dialed in, then I can stick with the plane and be happy with where it is. But I might fly this plane and feel that there's a little bit too much aileron movement, right? So I'll adjust the dual rates, adjust my expo settings so it's more even when I switch the gyro on and off. You know, those first 10 to 20 flights, that's what they're for, getting everything dialed in. But hopefully you guys found this interesting. That's basically the setup on the plane. You know, I started this about 8 o'clock and it's 10:30 now. So it took about 2.5 hours. It would be about an hour and a half probably without having to video it, but that's how it worked out, guys. So if you have any questions, make sure you list them below. Happy to help you, happy to answer any questions that you might have. You know, this is rather specific to a JR radio, but very similar to a Spectrum radio, and rather specific to the Ultra Flash, but it's a lot of knowledge that you could expand into other planes, no problem. This is a fairly simple aircraft. You know, 11, 12 channels works fine. There's really there is no operational gear doors, so that makes things more simple. That's it, guys. So thanks so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. Also, when you hit that subscribe button, don't forget to hit the bell so you get notified when I release new videos. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.